Right, perfect for taking pictures, not exactly perfect for carrying out a military campaign, but in the early going, the word from the Pentagon is this is going very well indeed. And Britt Hume, that is very good news indeed.
Well, it's so far so good, it would seem, at least in terms of the efforts to convert senior Iraqi military officials to the idea that maybe this isn't a war they want to be in. Let's go back to the Pentagon now and our colleague Major Garrett for late word on this whole question of forces embedded. Major, is that what you were going to talk to us about?
Yeah, Britt, Shepard was touching just a moment ago on the historic nature of having these embedded troops, embedded reporters rather, with the troops and the technology they possess to bring back live from the field pictures. And what I can tell you, having been at the Pentagon all day today, is essentially these embedded reporters are scouts not only for us, scouts for the media, scouts for our audience, but scouts for the Pentagon. And the early first reports they provide give indications to the Pentagon of what's happening on the field and allow them to more accurately go back and check the information. We had field reports earlier this morning about missiles being fired over Army, U.S. military personnel. Those were then verified here at the Pentagon. There were early reports, the very first reports, of oil wells being on fire. That was then verified here. The original number we had from our embedded reporters was 1 or 2, confirmed here at the Pentagon to be 3 or 4. So what you're seeing in a real-time situation is reporters embedded with troops seeing things, broadcasting them, and alerting the Pentagon and the vast military apparatus here, who then begins the information tracking back to the source to find out exactly what happened, and the communication link is almost instantaneous. And what you're getting is a much more responsive feedback process with what happens on the field, what we can confirm here in a very rapid succession here, and information gets out much, much faster. Now, if this was the Pentagon's master plan, I don't know, but it is happening, and I've lived it all day today. One other point, and I think this is something that we can now say with almost absolute clarity, based on all of our conversations we've had today with senior military officials about shock and awe, and this is this. If you have to ask, is this shock and awe, you're not seeing it. Because when it happens, it will be absolutely, positively no doubt of what you're seeing. So if you're saying, oh, that looks, could that possibly be it? No, it's not, because it will be so overwhelming, so ferocious in its scope and magnitude, that it will be undoubtedly this shock and awe aerial bombardment that the military has so long talked about. It. That's two things that I've picked up in the last hour, not so much on breaking news, we're still gathering a lot of that now, but just sort of the atmospherics and how information is transferring from the field to here, and also appraisals of what really we're seeing. Is it shock and awe? Is it not? If you have to ask the question, that's not it.
All right, Major Garrett, thank you very much. We get a sense from that map there of the dimensions, just with the graphics on that map, of what it will be when the moment comes. And of course, it's the one we're all watching for. General Thomas McInerney remains with us. General, not in that particular picture we're seeing of the skies over Baghdad, but in the one we were seeing earlier, where you could see that while there was cloud cover, it was kind of bright and there was a pretty full moon there. What does that say about what does that say to an old Air Force hand about whether you want to make this the night be the night?
You don't want to fly below those clouds, Britt, because you could see the clouds are white.
The picture, yeah.
You can see it, and your airplane can be seen very easily. We're very fortunate to have high flyers, and the weapons we have today can be dropped at high altitudes, which enables us to get around some of these deficiencies. And that's why when everybody thought we wouldn't go till the moon was down, still a full moon, you can see why we didn't want to do that. But we could do it at any time.
We now could do it.
Yes.
All right.
And we are doing it, as you're seeing.
Well, I take your point.
Safer is the point I think.
Safer when it's dark.
Yes, sir.
But now the difference being much less than it once was.
Exactly, because we have the altitude that we can get up.
Let me turn to another former Air Force General, Burton Moore, who was director of J3, director of operations during Desert Storm. General, I have to ask you about what you make of all of this stuff with these journalists riding along with the forces. You didn't do it that way back then. What do you think about it?
No, it's a new world we're living in, Brett, and I think it's interesting to hear Major Garrett report that the trust that has already been built between the military and the journalists. The military has said to the journalists, you can go along, you can report when we tell you to report, but don't reveal any operational security matters. The journalists have supported that, and I think we're going to see more of this if in the future we have to fight more of these wars.
Now, I
think it's great.
Now you heard Greg Kelly saying that you know, they're pretty much on their own and they're free to report other than operational details such as their location, and I guess the location is the most sensitive thing. They're free to pretty much report whatever they want. So if there was some firefight in which something went badly or an alleged atrocity on the part of Allied forces, one presumes that the journalists would be allowed to report that. Am I correct?
I would presume that. Now, I'm not sure what specific guidance has been given by the Department of Defense, but I think if those guidelines are, they would allow them to do certain things. Now, there might be some limits that they would draw until they could figure out just what happened.
All right. Now, what's your sense of it? This a good thing?
I think it's a good thing. If you'd asked me that 15, 20 years ago, I might have had a different answer, but the proof here is in the pudding and how the team of journalists and the team of military have merged together, and I think it's for the benefit of both, and it's also for the benefit of the American people and people around the world that see just what we're doing and how we're doing it.
All right, General Moore, thank you very much. Thank you very much for being with us. Let's go back to Shep in New York. Shep?
All right, Britt, thank you very much. I want to get to Chris Klein now. Chris Klein, who's been reporting for us from northern Iraq to see if there's any sort of movement in that region. Chris, what can you tell us?
Shepard, yes, indeed. There's been a very significant development. We've just learned in the last hour from high-ranking members of the Kurdish regional government that the United States has formally asked for military help from the two principal factions here in liberated northern Iraq. That would be the Kurdistan Democratic Party and the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan military forces. The United States has formally asked for these forces to join with U.S. units that will be entering this northern front to aid them in capturing Mosul and Kirkuk in the north, as well as to aid them in the drive south, that is north to south, converging on Baghdad. A substantial development, one also primarily brought about by the problems that the United States has experienced in negotiating a troop deal with Turkey, and since that deal now has essentially foundered with Turkey only allowing the United States to fly through Turkish airspace, this means that the United States cannot deploy heavy forces via Turkey and will have to deploy only airborne, air mobile, and special forces elements. Therefore, the presence of the Kurdish forces, who are primarily battle-hardened light infantry, will strengthen the United States military efforts here in the region substantially. Initially, we're talking about some 30,000 Kurdish troops. This number could swell to, well, 3 times that number, so perhaps 90 to 100,000 extra rifles fighting under the coalition flag is a substantial military achievement. Obviously, as well, Mosul and Kirkuk are vital, absolutely strategic oil installations in Iraq, will be vital to post-war Iraq, will be vital to the global economy, will be vital to the United States and Western security interests. And further, there's another strategic dimension to this. That region also contains an operational, functional airport, which will allow heavy capacity, heavy lift U.S. air transports to land, which will provide a substantial logistical and deployment boost to American efforts there. Lastly, this would seem that the United States has definitively banned repeated Turkish requests to enter unilaterally into northern Iraq, despite the fact that Turkey is a valued and important and powerful NATO ally. It seems the coin has now landed in favor of the Kurds. Military necessity, political necessity, and the future of post-war Iraq and the security of the greater region as a whole have determined this. Shepard.
Very interesting that this has happened so quickly, not surprising at least, because we'd heard all along that they were hoping for this sort of cooperation, but that to bring such a thing together so quickly and with such relative ease is impressive, as you say, quite indeed. Now, you were talking about the town of Mosul. We were getting reports earlier from the town of Mosul that there had been some sort of explosion heard in this town. I think we have a map and a picture of where Mosul is, certainly strategic in its importance because of the oil wells and all the rest as just discussed. But what do you know about these explosions there earlier?
We can't substantiate whether those reports are credible or not. As you can expect, the rumor mill is well at work. We have received also sporadic reports that there have perhaps been some skirmishes there. Again, I would be very careful to confirm that, because we can't confirm that independently at present. We've even heard even more disturbing reports that both around Mosul and Kirkuk, and again I would emphasize, unsubstantiated unsubstantiated reports as yet that among the defensive measures that the Iraqis have taken is to bury large canisters of napalm. We all know napalm is a very fearsome weapon. It is jellied gasoline that has been in use as an aerial ground attack weapon since the Second World War. It is a fearsome weapon, and these reports seem to claim that the Iraqis have modified these canisters of napalm, buried them in the ground so that they can be detonated by remote control. If it is indeed true, it is a terrifying prospect. If it is false, perhaps it is another dimension of Iraqi psychological warfare to try and demoralize U.S.-led coalition forces.
All right, well, we'll check back in with you as events warrant. Thanks very much for the very good news, in fact, that there's cooperation with the Allied Forces Command from the locals there in the region, and in fact, a joint force which has now grown substantially in number over the past hours. He was mentioning the napalm and the buried napalm, or reports thereof. We also know from first-hand reports along the Kuwaiti border, along the southern end of the Kuwaiti border as it connects to Iraq, that there have been reports of Iraqi soldiers working to mine areas. And as there were a number of Iraqi soldiers who were surrendering to Allied forces, they reported seeing them placing landmines all around the area. There was no forward progress after that, and one could speculate, at least, that part of the reason is they have to make sure that these landmines are taken out. Let's go to Britt Hume now in Washington. Britt?
Shep, we are keeping an eye out for this cabinet meeting that the president is having at this time, and let's check in with our White House correspondent Wendell Goler on that. Wendell, I noted that Ari Fleischer said earlier when he noted that there would be a cabinet meeting, he said the pool would be welcomed. I assume that what we're expecting here is a round of questions and some answers from the president. Wendell?
Well, we're hoping, Britt. It's unclear whether or not Mr. Bush will simply make a statement or whether he will actually take a few questions from reporters. He is likely to, and we will certainly attempt to do so. The pool has been gathered now, and very shortly will be taken into the cabinet room where the president is meeting with his cabinet. Ari Fleischer saying that he is urging his secretaries to remain focused on what Fleischer calls a very busy and important domestic agenda. This continues several months' attempt to make sure the country sees the president as focused on the domestic agenda and not letting that slide while his attention is distracted by the effort to remove the regime of Saddam Hussein. So we can expect the president to talk a bit today about the medical liability reform proposals he made a short while ago, also his program to reform Medicare and add a prescription drug benefit, and also his $700+ billion economic stimulus package, now struggling, if you will, on Capitol Hill because of concerns that it would not stimulate the economy quickly enough. That said, the White House is also making sure to show the president as having made the proper balance of leadership and reliance on his military advisors as we move forward with this effort in Iraq. The president consulting frequently, hourly, if you will, with Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld and his National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice. Press Secretary Ari Fleischer saying Mr. Bush has basically given the mission to the military and defined the broad parameters, and now the military, of course, making operational decisions. Britt?
Wendell, there was a fascinating still picture that came out of the White House earlier, released, I presume, by the White House, that showed the president in the Oval Office, Vice President Cheney across from him, CIA Director Tenet kind of leaning over the president's shoulder, appearing to be speaking to Cheney as they were gathered there. It was not clear to me when I first saw it when it was taken. Was that in the midst of the deliberations over the strike last night? Was that in the midst of a briefing this morning? What do we know about that picture that I think many of our audience has probably seen by now and perhaps wondered about?
I believe it's our understanding, Britt, that picture was taken last night before the president addressed the nation after having given the execute order to, based on CIA information, go ahead and try and decapitate the regime of Saddam Hussein. Officials, of course, had gotten information that led them to believe they knew where Saddam and his sons would be at that time. And so the president ordered what turns out to be early military action. There you see Chief of Staff Andy Card
Yes, Chief of Staff Andy
Chief of Staff
Card
Andy Card on the president's left shoulder, and Director Tenet leaning over the desk and talking to the vice president right there. These players have been here a couple of times a day for several days now, Britt. The president meeting twice a day earlier this week with Defense Secretary Rumsfeld, getting updates on the operational planning, and White House officials say that they will have the president and his defense secretary face-to-face meetings at least twice a day for the foreseeable future as the president tracks the progress of the war.
Wendell.
This in addition to regular telephone contact. Britt?
All right, Wendell, thanks very much. Comprehensive report. Great jacket, man. Let's go back to Shepard Smith in New York. Shep?
All right, Britt, thanks very much. We're just getting some new reports from the front lines, and there had been fears all along, of course, that Saddam Hussein would try to attack either our troops, which it appears that he has done, at least with these reports of Scud missiles flying over the head of Rick Leventhal and others, missiles which hit none of our troops and were not, to our knowledge, carrying any sort of weapons of mass destruction, that he might do that he might try to hit Israel, which he has clearly to this point not tried, or that he might try to hit targets inside Kuwait. Now it is believed, at least, that may have happened. Quoting from the first reports in from the region, a projectile has landed near a Kuwait oil export terminal. Some sort of projectile, yet unspecified what kind of projectile, landing near a Kuwait oil export terminal. What that was, we don't know, but we can tell you that it hit nothing and destroyed nothing. Early reports were, to the military's knowledge, prior to the beginning of this conflict, Saddam Hussein was believed to have some 24 Scud missiles. If they were more, the Allies did not know about them. If you figure 24, we now have reports to 3 at least going over the head of Rick Leventhal and the troops there along the Kuwaiti border. Some sort of projectile here. The numbers are falling and falling quickly. Brett Baer reporting from the Pentagon that the Republican Guard is falling from within. That report from inside the Pentagon, and a welcome matter indeed for all of the Allied forces. Inside Baghdad, as you can see, it's one of the brightest nights at 6 minutes before the hour of 11 o'clock that you can ever imagine. The camera has the ability to raise the light level. It's not quite as bright as this to the naked eye, but nonetheless a very bright night under a full moon, where correspondent Chris Yumpelt is standing by. He joined us for a short time last night and is with us again. Chris, what can you tell us? Chris Yumpelt? I guess we lost him in the connection, as sometimes happens. We'll try to reestablish, but you can see a live street shot. This picture with the night scope vision, which turns everything green but allows us to see with even the slightest bit of light. And you can see from this version there are some emergency vehicles working through the streets. And from the last version, which we had, you could tell that, in fact, there was a red light ambulance of some sort wandering around the city at this point. We have more confirmation now from our sister network, Sky News in London, that, in fact, there was a strike on a family home of Saddam Hussein. That strike did not hit, or it did make contact, but that there were no casualties. No casualties reported. Sky News has now confirmed those original reports that there was a strike on a facility there, a family home of Saddam Hussein, a family palace, as they put it, but no casualties reported and no estimate of damage thus far. I can tell you that the movement in and around the Kuwaiti border does continue. 2 towns have now been captured. Qasr, which is the southernmost town about 30 miles south and east of Basra, has been captured by U.S. forces. At Basra, we know that there was some sort of firefight. But in the city of Baghdad, all is quiet now. Just about an hour ago, the all-clear siren went off, and since then, no reports of any sort of artillery or anti-aircraft fire. Let's reconnect now with Chris Yumpelt, who is inside Baghdad. Chris, anything new to report?
Good evening from Baghdad. No, as you say, it's all quiet now. About 2 hours ago, which makes it 9 p.m. local time, the anti-aircraft fire was opened, and at least in major parts of the town, there was no anti-aircraft sirens before the fire was opened. And then there were some hits to be noticed on the far eastern borderline of the town. I cannot be precise what could possibly have been hit there. But about 10, 12 minutes into that raid, right in the center of town, the Ministry for Military Planning took a direct hit and went up in smoke.
Well, it's very difficult to understand, Chris, and I apologize for interrupting, but your satellite phone connection is such that it's very difficult to understand. We know that the ministry offices were targeted there. The extent of damage we do not yet know. When we know, we will take you there. In the meantime, it's time for a playback of the president and his meeting with his cabinet. Brit Hume in Washington. Brit?
Yeah, Shep, before we go to that, and it's about to be played back, and we'll all see it at once when it is. This is one of these events which is where the president does not speak live, and when the networks go in and we record the event, and then when it's played back, we all take it at once. So it'll be just in a few seconds here. But we've just heard from our correspondent, our reporter Terry Schultz at the State Department, that Richard Boucher, whom I earlier erroneously referred to as Charles Boucher, Richard Boucher, the spokesman there, has said that the U.S. has asked all countries that have Iraqi representation, diplomatic representation, to please expel the diplomats or other representatives, which, as she put it, is about as close as the State Department can come to shock and awe in the diplomatic channel. So I pass that along as we await what is, we understand, was not a Q&A session with the president, but merely a statement that the president read at the top of his cabinet meeting. So here in just a moment, the President of the United States.
Called my cabinet together to review our strategies to make the world more peaceful, to make our country more secure, to make the lives of our citizens as healthy and as prosperous as possible. We heard from Secretary Rumsfeld, who briefed us on the early stages of the war. There's no question we've set the finest of our citizens into harm's way. They perform with great skill and great bravery. We thank them. We thank their loved ones. We appreciate their sacrifice. Word from Secretary Powell, who briefed us on the ever-growing coalition of the willing nations who support our deep desire for peace and freedom. Over 40 nations now support our efforts. We're grateful for their determination. We appreciate their vision, and we welcome their support. As well, we discussed the need to make sure we have plans in place to encourage economic vitality and growth. We will continue to push for a Medicare system that is compassionate for our seniors. We care deeply about the fact that some children in our society can't read. We want the best of education for every citizen in America. This cabinet is confident about the future of our country. We're confident we can achieve our objectives. I'm grateful for their service to their country. Thank you all.
The president, as you can imagine, got some shouted questions after that statement that he read, but he did not take them, and the pool was then chased out of the cabinet room, as pools often are. The president, you heard what he said. What I think may have been noteworthy, there are two things. One is the ever-growing coalition of which he spoke. The number grows now. The president has got it up to 40, and he's talking, of course, about those who have made public their willingness to be involved in the coalition in this undertaking. Also, you heard him talk about the other initiatives. Wendell Golder mentioned that earlier. This president seems determined not to avoid the image that seemed to overtake his father of a man totally preoccupied and concerned with foreign undertakings, foreign affairs, foreign policy, defense issues, to the exclusion of, and perhaps in the eyes of some, to the neglect of domestic issues. It was, after all, a weak economy, which was perceived, I think, at the time as being weaker even than it was, that proved such a political liability to the first President Bush. So you see the president trying, even as this war with Iraq gets underway, to tend his fences on those diplomatic issues. So not a lot of hard information out of that cabinet meeting, but a sense of the president's presence, his demeanor, his mood, and the things that he is trying to emphasize. Shep?
Britt Hume live with us in Washington. Britt's going to stand down for a little while, do some reporting of his own, and he'll be back tonight 6 o'clock Eastern Time, 3 o'clock Pacific for special report with Britt Hume and the most comprehensive political coverage you'll find anywhere on the dial, and of course continuing war updates with America at war. It is now 3 o'clock in the East, noon in the West, 11 p.m. in Baghdad, and the campaign to liberate the people of Iraq has now begun and is underway. The Allied forces have made movements on many fronts. As reported on Fox News Channel and on this Fox station over the past 3 to 4 hours, some United States, Great Britain, and Allied forces have moved across the border and into Iraq. A southern city in Iraq has now been captured by Allied forces. The town of Basra reported that there was some degree of firefight happening there, and that Allied forces had moved toward that area. They've also moved toward the north and east, the important cities of Mosul and Kirkuk in the northern region of Iraq, along the border with Iran secondarily and Turkey primarily, Mosul along the Tigris and Kirkuk to the south and east of that. Very important, long and short. Oil wells there, strategic airstrips are there, and there have been reports of explosions in those areas. Inside Baghdad, Sky News, our sister network out of London, is now confirming our earlier reports that in fact a family palace of Saddam Hussein has been hit inside Baghdad. A number of other targets were hit just outside Baghdad to the south and east of the center of the city, including some military operations and, in fact, some government buildings, including a number of ministry buildings in and around them. The lights are still on in Baghdad at 2 minutes past 11 o'clock in the evening. We have no reports of any further cruise missile strikes since the ones that erupted in the night air just about 2 hours ago. The full moon over Baghdad giving an all-clear sign. At this moment, the people there are never under attack, but the military forces there are not under attack either. And in this quiet before the next storm, let's go to our correspondent, Major Garrett. Major is live with us right now inside our Pentagon newsroom. Hello, Major.
I've been all day. Let's talk about what the Pentagon feels best about right now, and they're being very close to the vest about operational successes. But the one thing they will sort of say to us in various ways is that they feel very good about the success so far of the psychological breaking down of the senior ranks of the Iraqi military and even the lower ranks of the Iraqi military. My colleague Bret Baier was able to report a couple of hours ago, talking to a senior U.S. official, that there is significant indications that the Iraqi military is breaking from within, that the psychological pressure, both provided by the rhetoric of the United States government and the facts on the ground, the military facts on the ground, both in Baghdad, south and north, is beginning to weigh heavily on the minds of the Iraqi military. And there is a great sense here at the Pentagon that things may break within in that respect, and that could provide a tremendous inroad for U.S. and coalition forces to achieve success far faster than anyone had been able to predict before hostilities in fact began. Let's summarize what has happened as far as these military facts on the ground. What's gone on this evening, Baghdad time in Baghdad, is essentially symbolic cruise missile strikes against government ministries meant to convey the message again to the Iraqi military that we can hit your government infrastructure. We will not hit civilian infrastructure. We will do everything we can to avoid civilian casualties, but we're going to pound your government, and the government that we believe is illegitimate and the government that must fall and that you should not risk your life to protect. That's the message there. What's happening in the south? We've talked about preparing the battlefield. What does that mean? Essentially what it means is numerous sorties from coalition aircraft targeting surface-to-surface mobile missile sites, also special operations forces on the ground in the southern part of Iraq to also attack those surface-to-surface mobile missile sites and engage Iraqi forces wherever they are found. Also, long-range artillery strikes from the 3rd Infantry Division. Paralyzing, powerful artillery strikes have already begun to engage the military, to pound them down, to prepare in case there needs to be a full-blown ground invasion. All of that is going on today. All of that falls under the broad category, Shep, of preparing the battlefield. It's what's been going on as far as the facts on the ground militarily in Iraq today. That's it from the Pentagon.
Major Garrett live at the Pentagon. Major, thanks to you and your team there. And this just in to Fox News Channel, early reports just in from the city of Baghdad that air raid sirens are sounding once again. We've seen no signs of any missile strikes, no signs of any artillery or aircraft flying overhead. There's been no anti-aircraft fire, just a full moon, but the air raid sirens are screaming once again at 5 minutes past 11 o'clock on a Thursday night in Baghdad. What does this mean? Well, history suggests to us that it could be any number of things. Back in 1991, after the initial wave began, there were then lulls, as is always the case during war. There were times when, out of nowhere, these sirens would go off, and the fact was there was actually nothing happening. We cannot testify to anything except that the sirens are now going off. When we know anything, we will let you know. Right now, I can tell you that Iraqi TV is saying that 4 Iraqi soldiers were killed in total during today's bombing campaign, 5 wounded all total. We have no way of corroborating any of that, but that is what Iraqi TV is reporting even as we speak. And we're also getting information which suggests that the strikes that were hit were predetermined strikes. Yesterday, there were targets of opportunity, as you know. There was Allied information from intelligence sources, possibly, though we don't know, special forces who were on the ground saying, we see Saddam Hussein or any one of 5 senior leadership members going into a particular bunker in a particular place outside of Baghdad. As that happened, the decision was made, as we understand it, from the highest levels of the Allied forces, including the White House, to go ahead and execute a strike if it was deemed that it might be successful. Early planning in all of this had set out a procedure under which,
near their positions, they thought they were under a gas attack.
The regime of Saddam Hussein is a very
key in that battle. So they are watching things develop, and the 101st Airborne, which will get in the big Black Hawk helicopters and move to different points.
That information, but suffice it to say that this,
because while they have an initial movement into Iraq, which I can't really go into detail about, they may be called upon to put out so-called fires. If 3rd Infantry, as they're moving into Iraq, suddenly have thousands of POWs that are giving themselves up, they don't want to be slowed down by that, and they're going to need other infantrymen to try and go in and deal with those prisoners so that the advance and the attack can continue, and also refugees on the road. That's been something else that's been discussed in battle planning. So we could see the 101st Airborne that is moving out on a certain schedule have that schedule suddenly flipped upside down, and they are prepared for that.
All right, Dana Lewis. Dana, thank you very much. We should point out Dana is attached or embedded, if you will, with the 101st Airborne Division in Kuwait. We want to go to Don Teague, one of our other correspondents in Kuwait right now. Don, what can you tell us?
Well, good evening, Lester. You know, you and I were here at the same time together in January and February, and we had these discussions, if you'll remember, about the sort of what-ifs and the worst-case scenarios about Kuwait City when this war kicked off, and a lot of the fears was that Saddam Hussein may try to send some sort of missile this way, and it appears that some of those fears were realized today. The U.S. military confirming that at least 2 ballistic missiles called Arbil 100s were sent this way, fortunately intercepted by Patriot missiles, but it made for a very tense day here today. At least half a dozen times the air raid sirens went off. One time late this afternoon, in fact, it was the last alert we had here. The siren that went off was the specific chemical weapons warning siren, which, as you can imagine, put a fright in everyone here. But the good news here, as far as Kuwait City is concerned, it's been at least 5 hours since any of those sorts of warning. The gas masks are still at hand, but they haven't been on in quite a while, and I can tell you we're all happy about that. Lester?
And Don, I can recall witnessing the many drills they had there for Scud attacks and other sorts of attacks. What was the reaction on the streets? Did it appear to be a population prepared for this eventuality?
Well, I started noticing about 36 hours ago, really shortly after the president's deadline, that this place sort of became a ghost town as far as the streets were concerned. And by noon today, almost magically before the first missile attack, it seems that everyone sensed that something was coming because there was really no one out there. So when those sirens went off, there was no one to watch as far as any sort of panic or reaction because people were already buttoned up in their homes.
All right, Don Teague. Don, thank you very much for the update from Kuwait City. We want to tell you about the attacks we witnessed a little over an hour ago today. We're now learning that British forces also joined in that attack. Some of the Tomahawks being fired from a pair of British submarines, as well as 2 U.S. submarines and 1 American surface ship. It was roughly an hour, perhaps an hour and a half ago, when the Baghdad sky lit up again with anti-aircraft artillery, the sound of low-flying planes. Apparently, those were the Tomahawks. Peter Arnett, who reports for National Geographic Explorer and MSNBC, was watching and narrating. Keep in mind, what you're about to hear is a tape from earlier. Here's Peter Arnett as he described the attack.
There's no anti-aircraft fire we can see, but there were 2 large explosions within a mile of us. One, a large building near the information ministry. It could be the TV center. We can't quite identify it yet. Another one opposite us in the presidential palace area. I think it may be one of the intelligence department buildings. We are not sure. There was 10 minutes of intense anti-aircraft fire. We heard the sound of low-flying planes, and there was a lot of activity way to the west of us, where there could have been other bombing. But as far as Baghdad is concerned, right downtown, 2 buildings destroyed so far. We basically saw the anti-aircraft essentially to the west and to the northwest. In terms of the actual center of Baghdad where we are, we did not notice much activity. Now, on the other hand, I just haven't literally seen many anti-aircraft weapons in this area. I presume that we're around. But I must say that in the first Gulf War, there was far greater use of anti-aircraft than we have tonight. It was just this total spectacular.
To the men fighting for freedom there in the Kuwaiti desert. We've talked throughout the day about the targets for these strikes by Tomahawk missiles, cruise missiles, and the rest. We've been given intelligence to suggest, as we've been reporting throughout the day, that one of the targets here may have been Tariq Aziz headquarters, the deputy prime minister of Iraq. The prime minister of Iraq is Saddam Hussein, the deputy prime minister, Tariq Aziz. And this is the location here. These images taken from space imaging, then enhanced by our Fox Graphics team. And you can see the spot here, the Council of Ministries on the left, Tariq Aziz offices there on the right. And our reporting has been and continues to be that one of these early missile strikes, which began the first air raid sirens just about 1 o'clock Eastern time, maybe shortly before that, 10 a.m. Pacific time, one of the first air raid sirens happened because of this missile strike, which is believed to have been targeted either the Council of Ministries on the left or Tariq Aziz offices on the right. Fox News can confirm that that strike did hit something, that there were buildings in that area which were burning. Whether or not the strike happened to Tariq Aziz's office remains to be seen, but we do know, as we showed you in pictures from earlier in the hour, these are those pictures from a building right there. I cannot confirm whether this is Tariq Aziz's office or whether the Tariq Aziz's building was hit, but I can tell you that it was targeted. So there you go. That's the location, south and east of Center City in Baghdad. Allied forces, strategic targets, surgical strikes, and that seems to be at least the order of the day. This just into Fox News Channel. The European Union draft statement urges Iraq's neighbors not to endanger stability. In other words, urges Iraq's neighbors not to get involved in this conflict. Very early in the reporting here on what's come out of the European Union, but we will clarify it as it does come in. I was reporting a minute ago that if you look at a flow chart of the Iraqi government, at the top of that list would be President Saddam Hussein, as they call him, and then a gap at Prime Minister, though some models would list Saddam Hussein as Prime Minister as well. He has multiple titles on this list. His main title is President. Tariq Aziz, the Deputy Prime Minister. There were rumors last night, I'd say 10 o'clock Eastern Time, 7 o'clock Pacific Time, that Tariq Aziz might in fact have been targeted and killed in this strike which happened, which caused the president to come out and speak about 10:15 Eastern Time. We did not report those rumors at the time, but they were flying around everywhere, and they were reported in other places. Within minutes, we saw a taped news conference of sorts from Tariq Aziz himself. He came to the microphones to sort of quash those rumors and quash that reporting as it was happening. Now it's become quite clear that if Tariq Aziz himself is not a target, at least his buildings are. I want to get to correspondence now as we make our way around the globe, and want to start with Homeland Defense. We were reporting earlier about a perceived, at least, threat, specific information about the largest nuclear power plant in all of America, and how there were specific threats on this power plant in Arizona, and that the Secretary, Tom Ridge, was working to identify exactly what that threat was, working with local and state law enforcement to try to identify it and track down the source of that threat. We have nothing new to report on that. But imagine the capture of another Mohammed Atta, a man with the same sort of designs as Mohammed Atta, an al-Qaeda type who would like as many Americans dead as possible. There is that sort of story developing today, and our chief political correspondent, Carl Cameron, has been on it for the better part of a couple of hours. Carl, what have you been able to learn, and what kind of progress have they made?
Hi, Shep. Well, the FBI has put out both a domestic and an international BOLO, which is a be on the lookout alert. The gentleman's name, Adnan al-Shukri Juma. He is a Saudi native, 27 years old, 5'4", probably not wearing a beard at this point. Last known to be in Miami, Florida, but the feds lost track of him just recently. It's a little unclear as to how long U.S. government counterterrorism officials have been actually tracking this gentleman. His alias is Jafar el-Hayar, and he has several. He is said to have trained in al-Qaeda, perhaps has flight school training, and is not considered to be a major al-Qaeda operative, not a top-level official, but is believed to be at large. And the FBI is asking both the public as well as state and local law enforcement for their help. The information just has come out in a short while ago. It is not clear what specific plot he may or may not be involved in, but the threat information and the credibility of the threat that this person represents has been verified with al-Qaeda detainees both at Guantanamo Bay as well as overseas. Again, the FBI and other counterterrorism agencies have had this person in their sights, and he disappeared a short time ago. Additional information coming out. Now, as for that other thing that you talked about, Shepard, the Palo Verde nuclear plant just outside of Phoenix, Arizona, is the largest commercial nuclear facility in the country. It's actually got 3 reactors. The governor of Arizona has called out additional National Guard support. Homeland Security Secretary Tom Ridge has said that they do have information that suggests that it is possible that al-Qaeda sleeper cells have been activated in the United States for a possible potential attack against that facility as well as others. Homeland Security, of course, at the orange high alert level at this point, but there has been an additional layer of security that's been added all around the country, prompting many to call it sort of an orange alert plus level. The Coast Guard has added an additional array of boats in various undisclosed ports with large teams in place. In addition, airports have been told to increase their security both on the perimeters of their airports as well as at the terminals themselves. So a large number of steps beyond the orange high alert level being taken right now, added to this new layer of security. The FBI putting out the BOLO beyond
more than used in 1991, a lot more smart bombs used and thousands of missiles as well. And just to follow up on a little bit more information we were getting on that second round of air attacks, if you will, in Baghdad, they did, according to a senior U.S. official, target.
Well, there's been a tremendous increase in the security that's underway in this country in the past couple of weeks, obviously. There are literally hundreds of former Iraqi national citizens in the United States who are under surveillance, wiretapping efforts, law enforcement exercises, watching nationals has stepped up dramatically. This particular individual, Jafar el-Hayar, one of his nicknames, is a Saudi national, and it's not known if he is in this country at this time. The FBI is saying
This is something very interesting to keep in mind. The Pentagon, we all have to know, for the first time has embedded more than 500 journalists. On the one hand, that is a tremendous bonus in that we're getting real-time information, real-time footage. At the same time, defense officials are not going to be ready to comment on each little tidbit, each little nugget of information that comes in. In fact, General Myers said, we are not going to talk about this until the full-scale operation begins. So what you're going to be seeing now will be more preparatory strikes, perhaps, more prepping of the battlefield. Some will be very visible that you can't help but notice. Other things they're not going to comment, so they're not really presenting an overall picture right now. Has the ground war begun? Is this the major assault? So basically we are relying on the various journalists that are positioned throughout the theater with the different forces. But again, I can tell you, according to officials here,
reporting a short time earlier about the city of Mosul, and this just in to Fox News Channel from Al Jazeera Television, saying that air raid sirens have just gone off in the town of Mosul, north and western section of Iraq, somewhere near the border of Syria and Turkey, right along the Tigris River, an extremely important location because of its oil wells and its airstrips, and crucial that the Allied forces capture it at some point in the early going before any sort of strike on Baghdad or movement toward Baghdad could take place. Now we know, according to Al Jazeera, the satellite television channel of Arabic language in the region, air raid sirens going off in the city of Mosul. We have a correspondent who's working for us in the northern part of Iraq, not in Mosul itself, but correspondent Chris Klein is now on the video phone for us. Chris, have you heard of these reports, and if so, what do you know about them?
Well, that information that you're receiving coincides with the information we're receiving. I would have to hazard, though, that we still cannot confirm that information. However, an educated guess, and obviously we have to be careful in making educated guesses, would seem that Allied air power is trying to soften up Iraqi anti-aircraft and air defense facilities around Mosul in advance of what everyone expects will be a ground attack by both, most likely, it's airborne, air mobile, special forces units, all three of those elements, in conjunction, now we've learned, with local Kurdish forces.
Chris, talk about, for a time, if you can, the importance of this town of Mosul, what you know about it right there along the Tigris.
Absolutely, Shepard. Well, both Mosul and Kirkuk are absolutely vital strategic cities in terms in several different categories. First, of course, is that they are two of the richest, largest, and truly major oil installations, key vital oil installations in all of Iraq. Secondly, if we think of that in a negative perspective, in terms of sabotage that the Iraqis have threatened the coalition forces with, of course, if they do indeed light the oil wells on fire again, as they did in Kuwait, previous Gulf War, if they burn oil, trenches filled with oil, the ecological hazard will be tremendous, not only to Allied forces, but to the locals, and indeed, if we think of it as shooting oneself in one foot, even to the Iraqi defenders themselves. And if it is a tactic that they will use to obscure their defenses from advancing Allied forces, it's a double-edged sword, because it will also obscure those Allied forces from the Iraqi perspective. They won't be able to see us very well. In that respect. The last final, most important point to make about both Mosul and Kirkuk is that they both have substantial airfields in relatively good condition. They may need some extra work by Allied engineers to better allow them to accommodate large capacity United States and other coalition air transports, but airfields will be absolutely crucial in building a stronger bridgehead here in the north, in providing a logistical point, and in general aiding the deployment and advance of Allied forces in the area. Shepard.
All right, thanks very much. Appreciate it. I want to explain to our viewers a little bit more about how this process will work. As you know, it's a two-front war, though we don't have a ground front coming out of Turkey, as it were. It's nonetheless a two-front war. The military experts seem convinced almost across the board on that. One of those fronts will come up from the south in Kuwait. An enormous force, which includes the 1st Brit, the 3rd ID from the U.S. military, Marine Expeditionary Units, which will be coming out of the Persian Gulf, all going as a mass force, working north and west and then surrounding the city of Baghdad. Coming from the north would be the 101st Airborne Division, which would move into the area from after using the skies of Turkey to fly in, and then coming in around the city of Mosul. And I think we have a map that we can show you of this. When they get to this city of Mosul, and there's a very important airstrip, as he was just speaking of just a moment ago, this airstrip, theoretically speaking, to be taken over, same in Kirkuk. And from there, they would be able to branch out, combine with the U.S. Special Forces, which are already, we presume, though we cannot confirm, on the ground in this part of Iraq, and able to secure the oil fields which are there, the oil wells which are there, take over those airstrips for Allied use, and then you have a way to operate in two different fashions. You'll be able to launch airstrikes from those particular bases in the north, and again, we're talking about an area that is not at all controlled by Saddam Hussein in the first place. It's out of his governmental control and has been at least since 1998. So you'll be able to operate from those air bases there. In addition, the troops will be able to move south. Allied troops, the British, the Australians, the United States, and all the rest coming south and toward Baghdad. So if you look at the big picture of this, an enormous 60,000, 70,000 man force coming from the south in Kuwait, an enormous force coming from the north, eventually after flying into Turkey and coming over from the Red Sea, working their way from Mosul and Kirkuk all the way down into Baghdad. And the final goal is surround Baghdad, take out the elite Republican Guard and the Special Republican Guard, then take down the regime and liberate the city and liberate the nation. And in a perfect world, at a time not so far in the distant future, there is, as I heard one of my colleagues say just the other day, a two-star general on top of a tank at the intersection of Main Street and Elm Street, if such a thing exists, in downtown Baghdad. And that means the people of Iraq are liberated and the people of that nation are free, and we can move on. In the meantime, there has been significant development on the southern portion of Iraq, right along the Kuwaiti northeastern border. Basra, a firefight there, and military actions as well. Just south and east of the town of Basra, Qasr, that small town and one of the most important port towns in all of Iraq has now been taken over and is in the control of Allied forces. Let's go to our Kuwait City newsroom now and correspondent William Lajeunesse for the latest on the forward motion from Kuwait. William, what do you know?
Shepard, as you said, Qasr is now in the hands of U.S. and British forces. What I wanted to tell you is a developing story here. We had just received reports that the oil export terminal in Fahahil, which is just south of Kuwait City here, had been struck by a projectile. Now, we have just heard from the Kuwait Emergency Response Center that it was a malfunctioning cruise missile that struck but did no serious damage to the oil export terminal. By the way, that is only a few hundred yards from CFLIC, which is the headquarters for the U.S. military PAO system here at the Hilton Hotel just outside of Kuwait City. Again, no serious damage, no injuries. However, there are reports of ambulances in the area. But as you said earlier, Shepard, around 8 o'clock local time, as the massive ground invasion occur and the tens of thousands of U.S. soldiers and hundreds of tanks cross the border, the Kuwait military reported heavy but indiscriminate incoming artillery shells and rockets from the Iraqi forces. They report that there are injuries, but at this point in time, no clarification on possible casualties to Kuwaiti military and or GCC or Peninsula Shield Forces, Arab soldiers here from Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, etc. We do know that that there have been at least 3, possibly 4 missiles fired at Kuwait. One has been a Scud missile taken out by the Scud busters, U.S. Patriot system missiles. 2, we are told, Patriots knocked down 2 incoming missiles, as well as a Patriot had been purchased by the Kuwaiti government, and 1 fell in the desert. However, only a football field away from Camp Commando. Thousands of U.S. troops forces there. That was earlier today around 4 o'clock local time. Indeed, here in Kuwait, during the day when those sirens sounded, many citizens headed for underground shelters, as well as the journalists here in town. The sirens sounded, we put on our gas masks, headed underground, wait for 20-30 minutes until the all clear sign came through. Indeed, those missiles had been intercepted. One of the reasons we do not expect similar calls tomorrow or sirens tomorrow is, number one, if the U.S. forces are gone here and they were the target, we should no longer be under attack from Iraq here in Kuwait City. Also, missile batteries are being hit, we know, by U.S. forces, by mobile rocket launchers being struck by F-16s, F-18s. Also, a battlefield awareness system that as soon as those missiles are launched, our spy planes can see it, and field commanders quickly direct fire into those, so those launches are taken out because they have multiple missiles. I do want to say one thing, that Iraq had insisted it had no Scud missiles. One of the missiles taken out was a Scud at a range of 400 miles. So indeed, their assertions that they did not have such now have been proved wrong. As far as the oil fields are concerned, Shepard, I'll just wrap up very quick here. As you said, the Rumelia oil fields near Basra, very important. The other ones near Kirkuk, very important. The difference here, when Saddam Hussein left Kuwait in '91, he lit 800 oil wells on fire. In Iraq, there are twice as many, 1,500 to 1,600. The critical point is twice as many. They pump twice as much oil. The fear by experts, the fire and the difficulty of putting them out will be that much, twice as difficult. Shepard, back to you.
William Lajeunesse reporting from outside our newsroom in Kuwait City. Seconds from now, we're going to be going to U.S. Central or Allied Forces Central Command outside of Doha in the nation of Qatar. But first, want to update you on a couple of our earlier reports. Rick Leventhal was first in this nation that I know of to report that, in fact, they were receiving fire toward Allied forces in the Kuwaiti desert. Was later confirmed that those were believed to have been Iraqi Scud missiles. Scud missiles, which of course are illegal under the rules as set forth by the ceasefire of 1991, missiles which of course Saddam Hussein has promised that he didn't have. That aside from that, as per Iraqi television now, our Fox News interpreter is giving us this information. The Iraqi High Command has advised on Iraq TV that in a statement that Iraqi forces launched missiles into 3 different sections or areas in and around Kuwait. 3 areas are Ali al-Salam, al-Shweik, and al-Doha. One of these areas, not to get too specific because we don't want to give specifics of the areas where our military forces may be. Suffice it to say that those reports from Iraqi TV do not fly in the face of reports from Rick Leventhal. The Iraqis are now admitting that they fired missiles into at least 3 areas. The United States, it is our understanding, and Allied forces can confirm that no damage has been done to any Allied forces, be they American, Australian, Spanish, British, or anyone else. No damage has been done to anyone, and there are no reports of any chemical or biological weapons being used against Allied forces. Now, with that said, further confirmation from Saddam Hussein himself. We spoke of the Allied missiles which were targeting, it was then believed, the family palace of Saddam Hussein. That was first confirmed by our Sky television, by our Sky network, our sister network in the UK. Now, Saddam Hussein's forces are saying that that strike was on a palace of his wife and one of his daughters. And Saddam Hussein's press release is now saying that none of those people were injured, but no word yet on the level of success of that strike. Now, I want to get to, I'm getting some earlier pictures that I want to show you now that have just come in. This is from inside Baghdad, from the early missile strikes. Let's listen. And that was the early firing, the early cruise missile strike that you saw right there. That was the first of the cruise missile strikes targeting surgical strikes in and around Baghdad. And as we know, one of the targets appeared to be near, if not in, Tariq Aziz, the Deputy Prime Minister of Iraq's offices south and east of Center City. There are new pictures coming to us now, courtesy of the United States military and allied forces. Let's get to Central Command now outside of Doha, Qatar, where correspondent Mike Tobin, actually David Lee Miller, is standing by live now. David Lee, good to see you. What do you have?
Good to speak to you, Shepard. Well, as the conflict continues to intensify, as the Allied troops drive deeper into Iraq, as the Iraqis fire Scuds in the direction of Kuwait, and as we see now more airstrikes over Baghdad, there is really essentially in place here at Central Command in Qatar a news vacuum. The authorities here, the military officials, have essentially not held a news conference since the conflict began a little more than 24 hours ago. This is the main press briefing room. Take a look over my shoulder, and behind me you can see in this $1,000,000+ center some of my colleagues actually sleeping. There are hundreds and hundreds of reporters that have assembled here from around the world, but at this hour, as I said, there are really shrieks of silence, nothing less than a news vacuum. They do not want to say or do anything that might in any way compromise the operation dubbed now Operation Iraqi Freedom. Not far from where I am standing, though, General Tommy Franks is in one of the operation centers, and he is watching on high-tech monitors what is happening on the ground. One of the things, though, that you did mention that we were able to get access to is some videotape. Let's take a look at this videotape. Let's roll it now. This has been released by the military. It is a broadcast pool that is being shared by all the broadcasters, and what you're going to be seeing here is some of the video recorded at the Al Udeid Air Force here in Qatar, and what you're going to be watching now are the F-117 Nighthawks, F-15E Strike Eagles, and F-16 CJs that took off in the last 24 hours. We are prevented from elaborating, giving you the details of the specific operations that these aircraft were involved in, but we can tell you that 9 aircraft and 2 strike aircraft, I should emphasize, and 2 refueling aircraft took off from the Air Force base here shortly before there were coalition strikes targeting the Iraqi leadership. And during that assault, 4 2,000-pound JDAM bombs, guided bombs, were dropped from Nighthawk F-117s. Also, we're getting word here, Shepard, that of those 40 Tomahawk cruise missiles that were launched from the Navy, they now have a breakdown of the number of ships that were involved. We are told that 2 of them were destroyers, the USS Milius and the Donald Cook, 2 cruisers, the Bunker Hill and the Cowpens, 2 submarines, the USS Montpelier and the USS Cheyenne. But for the most part, here at Central Command, at the Media Center, Shepard, at this hour, for all practical purposes, there still remains in effect a news blackout. The #1 priority for General Tommy Franks and his staff, they say, is running this war. When the time is appropriate, they say, he will speak from the podium behind me, and he will hold a detailed news briefing. And when that happens, we will be here to bring it to you. But that now is the latest from Doha. Back to you in New York.
Good stuff, David Lee Miller. Thank you very much. And this just coming into Fox News Channel from our senior White House correspondent, Jim Angle, who can now report senior administration officials do believe it was Saddam Hussein on television last evening, not a body double, as speculation had run rampant. We had gotten early reports from the Israeli intelligence sources who reviewed those tapes, and they thought that, in fact, it was Saddam. Now the question is, was it live or was it Memorex? Our correspondent Wendell Golders live at the White House now with late-breaking details as we know them. Wendell?
Well, Shepard, we know it was Memorex. The question is, when exactly was it taped? And even though Saddam Hussein mentions the 20th of March, there are concerns about whether or not this was taped last night or whether it might have been previously taped. Officials we talked to say that Saddam Hussein does use body doubles on occasion, but they're more likely to be used, for example, in presidential motorcades, not in a television appearance. One official said this is not like the movie Dave, where somebody pretended to be the President of the United States and actually gave speeches for him. We did see the President of the United States today at a meeting, after a meeting with his cabinet, in which he urged the members to keep focused on domestic matters. He even as he and his national security advisors continue the effort to remove Saddam Hussein's regime. The White House switched plans to have the president's public appearance today be an Oval Office meeting with the president of Cameroon. You may remember Cameroon is one of those nations in the United Nations Security Council that refused to publicly commit to the U.S.-British resolution, and there would have been likely some uncomfortable questions shouted at the president of Cameroon. At the cabinet meeting, the president urged his secretaries to keep focused on Medicare reform and education issues. And in a picture-taking session at the end of the meeting, though the president refused to take questions, he did address briefly the ongoing military conflict.
We heard from Secretary Rumsfeld, who briefed us on the early stages of the war. There's no question we've set the finest of our citizens into harm's way. They perform with great skill and great bravery. We thank them. We thank their loved ones. We appreciate their sacrifice. We heard from Secretary Powell, who briefed us on the ever-growing coalition of the willing nations who support our deep desire for peace and freedom. Over 40 nations now support our efforts. We're grateful for their determination. We appreciate their vision, and we welcome their support.
Now, in addition to showing the president continuing to focus on the economy and not lose sight of that as he prosecutes the war in Iraq, officials also want to show the president displaying the proper blend of leadership and reliance on his military advisors. They say he has defined the mission and given broad parameters to the military, which he is then counting on them to translate into action. The president is phoning Defense Secretary Rumsfeld several times throughout the day, meeting with him personally at least twice a day. That said, the decision to try for Saddam Hussein last night came after the president himself issued an execute order based on intelligence that the CIA had obtained that they thought they knew where Saddam Hussein and his sons would be at a particular time. The president decided to up the schedule for military action. There's been some criticism, of course, from countries like Russia. Russian President Vladimir Putin saying this military action is unjustified. There's been no answer to the question of are there weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. White House officials say that Russia's concerns are well known. Said the president and Russian President Putin basically agreed to disagree, but they also agree that relations between the U.S. and Russia are too important to allow this or any other issue to damage them. And on that score, Mr. Bush does not believe that U.S.-Russian relations will be damaged by the current military action in Iraq. Shepard?
All right, Wendell Goler live for us at the White House. Wendell, thanks very much. And this just into Fox News Channel. We were reporting of this second airstrike that happened in the overnight hours. Now, 12:42 a.m. on a Friday in Baghdad, and we can now confirm that a second round of U.S.-led air attacks was launched late Thursday night, and these are the pictures thereof from early in Baghdad. But U.S. military officials said the assault was not the beginning of the massive air campaign that the Pentagon has planned. The air attacks underway in Baghdad were sea-launched Tomahawk cruise missiles fired at Special Republican Guard strongholds inside Baghdad. Now, the Special Republican Guards are more special than the elite. There are 15,000 elite Republican Guards who act as Saddam Hussein's personal military, if you will. Then there is the Special Republican Guard, which act as his personal bodyguards, and about 5,000 of them. It is that elitist of the elite bunch that this strike was targeting, that according to two senior offense officials with the direct knowledge of the operation, both asking not to be identified. Again, Thursday's airstrikes were not the beginning of the massive air assault that the Pentagon plans to unleash later at a time of the coalition and the president's choosing. That according to three military officials. Two of those said those strikes involved a smaller number of Tomahawks than the opening volleys from yesterday. And as we reported on Fox News last night, those numbered about 40. Interestingly enough here, this is the Tomahawk cruise missile and the information about it. These things cost more than $1 million apiece, but they are extremely accurate. 1.4 million. They are extremely accurate, and they're fired from cruisers in the Persian Gulf, and sometimes actually they could be fired from cruisers in the Red Sea. The latest attack, though, included these Tomahawk missiles fired not only by the American ships, but by British ships as well, clearly throughout the conflict. America's best friend in this effort by coalition forces to liberate the people of Iraq and disarm at long last the Iraqi regime. So there you have it, a British ship, part of the launching of the Tomahawk cruise missiles, which targeted the Special Republican Guards strongholds in and around Baghdad today. All right, want to get on now and move to the Iraqi-Jordanian border. We were reporting earlier today that there have been a number of people who surrendered, according to reporters, along the border with Kuwait to Allied forces there. Not enormous numbers, but certainly some. There are similar reports from the border with Jordan. Let's go to our correspondent, Jennifer Eccleston, who's live on the video phone with us. Jennifer, what do you know?
Oh, hi there, Shep. But two important developments out of Jordan today. The first one is that the Jordanian government has sealed its border with Iraq and has now established it, designated it as a military zone. They say, however, that they are still receiving traffic from Iraq. Those people who want to flee the country and seek shelter in Jordan are still welcomed. They are being vetted by a significant Jordanian military presence there, however. What you cannot do is leave Jordan to go into Iraq, as a number of journalists tried to do today. Now, the Jordanians, anticipating an influx of refugees, have put up a number of tent cities around the border. Now, the numbers we've seen so far haven't been too great, nowhere near the number that we saw during the first Gulf War, where 1.5 million refugees sought shelter in Jordan, and it was with a devastating effect on the local economy. Now, the second event today is that we're hearing that Jordanian officials are now detaining a number of Islamic activists. Those include members of the Jordanian Ba'ath Party and of the Muslim Brotherhood, and also a number of students have also been taken into police custody. This is clearly an effort to stem anti-war protests that may occur tomorrow, Friday, the traditional day of prayer, where we often see protests during times of conflict. So definitely the mood here at the Jordanian-Iraqi border and across this country is that of mounting tension. Back to you, Shep.
All right, Jennifer Eccleston live with us along the border with Jordan. We'll get back to Jennifer as events warrant. Lots of news still coming into us, though we can tell you that the most recent air raid sirens over Baghdad, as reported, or over the city of Mosul, which were reported by the Al Jazeera television network, have so far brought nothing about. Mosul, as we've been reporting throughout the day, is an important strategic target for the Allied forces. It's right along the Tigris River in the northern section of Iraq, a section not controlled directly by Saddam Hussein, hasn't been controlled directly by Saddam Hussein in at least 5 years. The Kurds, of course, the predominant force there, and we've gotten reports from our own Chris Klein that there has been a cooperative agreement which has been brought about in the early goings here, which would allow the forces in northern Iraq to team, for lack of a better word, with the Allied forces here as an eventual move toward Baghdad comes into play. We're waiting to see exactly how that shakes out, but our correspondent Chris Klein is saying that deal is done and that cooperation is in the works. What exactly was happening in Mosul remains a mystery at this hour. The air raid sirens happened, and in addition, there were some explosions there. But so far, so good, says the lower third on your screen as we approach midnight in Baghdad. Next on our agenda here on Fox News Channel, with continuing coverage of the conflict with Iraq, let's go to Major Garrett, who's at the Pentagon for us. Major?
Shep, I want to give a broad recap, if I could. As David Lee Miller pointed out just a few moments ago, Operation Iraqi Freedom is almost 1 day old, almost 24 hours old. And let's hit the major headlines as Lee says it viewed here from the Pentagon. First and foremost, no coalition casualties to report. That's a big item here at the Pentagon for obvious reasons, and a big item to all of those in our audience worried about coalition forces, specifically U.S. forces. No casualties to report today. Second headline. Although operational success details are very hard to come by both at Central Command and Qatar and here at the Pentagon, there is a lot of body language and some assessments we're receiving from senior military officials about the progress in the psychological warfare being engaged against the senior Iraqi military. And the body language and the off-the-record sentiments here is that it's going very, very well. When we have up on our screen, so far, so very good, that's a reference explicitly to the psychological warfare going on to induce senior Iraqi military officials to give up the ghost, to get out of the way, and to allow the liberation of Iraq to occur with minimal hostilities on the ground in Baghdad, Mosul, Kirkuk, anywhere engaged, possibly in the future, militarily by coalition forces. Third big headline. Great success on the ground in Kuwait intercepting incoming Iraqi missiles, be they Scuds, Al-Samud 2s, or Al-Abib 100s. In any case, whatever the variation of those missiles, all, by the way, which were ruled illegal by the UN, in any case, whatever their form, they were successfully intercepted by either Patriot PAC-2 or Patriot PAC-3 anti-missile systems. A very big deal here at the Pentagon because those systems relied upon heavily to provide exactly the kind of defenses that we have seen today. Lastly, oil well fires. The Pentagon confirms 3 or 4, but in the last several hours, there have been no additional ones. Clearly, oil well fires were always a concern. 3 or 4 is not good news, but the fact that the numbers have not multiplied, have not grown substantially in the last 3 or 4 hours is being interpreted here as a good sign because it means there is not widespread, successful sabotaging and booby trap operations being engaged in by the Iraqis. Clearly, they want to deal with those 3 and 4. But in numbers that small, it will not provide any sort of military impediment and could probably be dealt with in an environmental way much more rapidly. The Pentagon was concerned that once one oil well went up, many, many more would. So far, so good on that front. So I would say in wrapping up what we've known and what we've been able to digest here, Shep, in the last 24 hours, those are the big operational and psychological headlines. Shep, back to you.
And Major, it's important to put this into context. When you think back to the planning of all of this, and there's this very wide range of possibilities with which the military planners were working there at the Pentagon, all the way from, in the early going, they blow up 1,000 oil wells, and they're able to send Scud missiles with chemical and biological weapons to our troops. And then the other end of that spectrum, which seems to be about where we are now. I mean, if you look at this objectively, it's hard to imagine, at least with the information we have now, that things could be much more successful than they have been.
Shepard, I sat here in a briefing in the Pentagon not more than a month ago talking about one nightmare environmental scenario only, dealing with massive destruction of oil fields, massive destruction of civilian infrastructure through Iraq, a complete campaign of destroying the country from within, not only to deprive coalition forces of a victory that would be seen as worth winning in the eyes of the world, but one that would cause very severe damage within the country and dramatically increase the rebuilding costs. So far, that hasn't happened. That was clearly a nightmare scenario, and what I think is being digested here at the Pentagon is this initial attack was not the shock and awe, was not the massive coordinated aerial and ground assault that had been so frequently spoken of. It was much more precise, a surgical strike, and it gave the Iraqis a chance to respond. And the response so far, I won't want to classify it minimal. I would just say that it is not as pronounced as it could have been and was feared before hostilities began here at the Pentagon, and that at least is an encouraging sign. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself and say all things are great, but clearly some of the early indications and things that were feared most have yet to occur. That has to be interpreted, at least right now, as generally positive news.
Well, let's talk about the facts as we know them, Major. The facts as we know them are these. A number of missiles have been fired over the heads, at least, of our correspondent, Rick Leventhal, and we'll show you some of that in just a moment. None of those, according to U.S. and allied forces, made contact with anyone, and they contain no chem and bio that we know of. In addition, we've done some softening up of positions on the other side of the Iraqi border and have met with very little resistance to our knowledge. Instead, have met with, in many cases, along the Iraq-Kuwaiti border and the Jordanian border, for that matter, surrenders, not firefights. There was some exchange of artillery fire across the Iraqi border at the spot from which Rick Leventhal was reporting. However, no strikes that hit any coalition forces. In the early going here, we have no reports of any casualties and no reports of any major problems that I know of.
That's right. And if I could focus in on specifically the missile issue, because it's very good news, and I can say that unequivocally in one respect. Let's say, for example, one of the missiles is a Scud, and there are conflicting assessments about that. If you follow my hand, a Scud trajectory is basically high and long, much easier comparatively for anti-missile defense systems to engage and destroy. These other varieties, Al-Samud 2 or Al-Abib 100s or other varieties, much shorter range and much lower trajectory. And for that reason, Shepard, they're much harder, generally speaking, for anti-missile defense systems to engage. It appears clear now, and officials we've spoken to at the Pentagon are certain that at least 2 of the missiles engaged and destroyed in midair were of the lower trajectory, shorter range variety. And that means tremendous success for the PAC-3, which is the 4th generation of the Patriot anti-missile defense system, a kind of success unseen yet in testing and never before seen in the field, and something will be interpreted here at the Pentagon as exceedingly good news, because if you can in fact engage and destroy in midair the short-range, low-trajectory missiles, you're very, very much ahead of the game. So in that respect, entirely, Shepard, I think I can say very confidently that is unadulterated good news.
Good news, absolutely. Major Garrett, thank you very much to you and your team at the Pentagon, keeping us updated throughout the day. I don't want to throw any water on all of this, but I remember distinctly in 1991, about 3 days, maybe 4 days into this campaign, as the night shots were seen on ABC and all the rest over Baghdad, and these reports that the Patriot missiles were doing such a fine job of knocking the Scuds out of the air, and you know, who's to say that that isn't what they believe? The truth of the matter turned out to be something quite different. But 12 years later, we were given assurances by the Pentagon that these Patriot missiles had been advanced to the point where they were a completely different missile, except by name, that the guts of this thing were different, that the testing was there, that they believed they would be able to work and save a lot of lives. And in the early going, it appears they may have been right. We were reporting earlier today about our correspondent Rick Leventhal, who was on the border there as troops engaged in a firefight of sorts as a missile went overhead. Rick's reporting was interesting, frightening to some who might have been his relatives, and fascinating to all the rest of us. Let's go back to that moment about 3 hours ago, and this is Rick Leventhal on the border with Kuwait and Iraq.
We are with Alpha Company, the 3rd Light Armored Reconnaissance Battalion. We have been witnessing some airstrikes against ground targets in southern Iraq. We thought we were moving, but we're not. We're still here. I can see, even though it's night, I can see large black clouds of smoke rising from the areas that were just recently struck by what appear to be air-to-ground missiles. We also saw additional strikes further off on the horizon. That was just moments ago. At this point, things are relatively quiet here, but I did want to get back to you and report that we're still on location, and the airstrikes are continuing. I can't get into operations that will be carried out. We have been briefed. I know what's supposed to happen, but I can't talk about it. I can tell you that these guys are definitely ready to move. They have been positioned in strategic locations. They are in fighting stance. And yes, we did see some action earlier today, and there is no doubt that these guys are ready for action on a moment's notice. My understanding is it is Marine heavy artillery, cannons, mortars, and tanks. And by the way, we're seeing more strikes now off on the horizon. Again, we believe these are from Cobra gunships striking targets on the ground in southern Iraq. It is an amazing sight. You can see red flashing lights on the choppers, and you can see white streaks of light, one after another, sort of like a dotted line from the vehicle in the air to the target on the ground. I don't see anything coming our way. I just see stuff going their way. And I'm going to put Captain John Custis on just for a moment. He is the commander of Alpha Company. He can't talk specifics about what actions are being taken out here, but he can talk about what kind of job your Marines are doing, Captain.
Before I say that the Marines are doing an outstanding job. They're taking actions exactly like they've rehearsed in training time and time again, and they're doing an outstanding job. Extremely motivated, and I couldn't be more happy about how they're performing. And there's been a lot of questions about, you know, timing. Are Marines ready to move? Reuters reported that Marines are being told to be ready to roll in 30 minutes.
my observation is you guys are ready to roll right now. The Marine Corps is always ready to roll. That's affirmative. Captain John Custis with Alpha Company of 3rd LAR. We are at a strategic location. We are witnessing airstrikes. We have seen artillery from the ground also striking targets on the horizon, and these strikes are likely to continue through the night.
And the strikes did go on for quite some time. Now you are looking live in the skies over Baghdad. Fast approaching midnight there, just about a minute to midnight. We've not heard from Rick Leventhal and his crew yet, which is exactly what we expected. They are on the move, mobile, and will set up again soon, we hope, for further reports on the forward progress of the Allies in a campaign to liberate the people of Iraq, to disarm the Iraqi regime. All of that to come in the days ahead. The early going and the early reports are that the campaign is going quite well. There have been surrenders along the border, and the Pentagon, though trying not to get ahead of itself, is saying it's very pleased with activities in the early going. What we have not yet seen and what is promised is a campaign of shock and awe. Many questions throughout the day. Is this it? Is this bombing raid it? Is this cruise missile strike it? Is this firefight over Rick Leventhal's head there in the Kuwaiti desert? Is that the beginning of it all? And the answer each time from the Pentagon, you'll know it when you see it. There'll be more mistaking it, no mistaking it, and we'll be here for you to cover it. I'm Shepard Smith in New York. For all of us in the Fox family, thanks for trusting us for your news. With the nation on high alert for terror and the nation now at war, stay brave, stay aware, and stay with Fox. Here's Neil Cavuto. Neil, good to see you.
Same here, Shep. Thank you very much. Well, a second wave of bombs over Baghdad and huge explosions rocking the Iraqi capital as Allied forces move to liberate Iraq. Now, cruise missiles targeting key control and command centers and Saddam's palaces. Government officials telling Fox that this is not, as Shep pointed out, the shock and awe that we have been told to expect. That could be maybe any minute. And White House officials now believe it was Saddam Hussein on TV last night. Hussein is known to use body doubles, but officials do not think he used one for this. They just don't know when it was taped. And there are reports now that senior Republican Guard leaders have expressed a wish to give themselves up. Our Brett Baer reporting that there are now indications the Iraqi military is breaking up from within. And the Pentagon confirming Iraqi troops set fire to 3 or 4 oil wells in southern Iraq, west of Basra. Oil prices initially jumped on this news. In fact, they moved up better than $2. They have since come back down. On Wall Street, the Dow finishing up for the 7th day in a row. Little shocked, little worried, little moved on an otherwise far from just little day. Welcome, everybody. I'm Neil Cavuto. Well, not shock and awe, more like stun and scare, but definitely hot and getting hotter for Baghdad, Iraq. The focus right now, Baghdad, and you are looking at a live shot of that city where, for the second time in less than 15 hours, explosions have been lighting up the night sky. But as massive as they have been, the Pentagon saying that they are not the real biggie we've been hearing so much about, or for that matter, what Wall Street was worried about. That apparently has yet to come. Now to Fox News' Greg Kelly, traveling with the Army's 3rd Infantry Division in Kuwait. Greg?
Hello, Neil. According to one local military commander here on the American side, so far the prepping of the battlefield on the Iraqi side has gone like clockwork, and we can personally vouch for that. We were brought out to a position extremely close to the Iraqi border, and on the minute they said it would, an artillery barrage opened up. We saw about 2 batteries of Paladin self-propelled artillery vehicles open up on Iraqi positions. Now, what were they firing at? Well, they're prepping the area on the immediate side of the Iraqi border. What's over there? Well, there's a minefield for one. There's also several berms that have to be breached. And there are posts from which Iraqis can observe the Kuwaiti border. According, again, it's going like clockwork. Now, in addition to that artillery barrage, there have been aviation assets that have also been used in prepping that side of the Iraqi border. We've seen Apache helicopters overhead firing at sites over on the Iraqi side. Also, as we go on now, we will be basically waiting in this position for some time. We're not sure what's going to happen next. Will this battle prep continue on the other side of the Iraqi border, or is something bigger coming, that shock and awe you've been speaking about? We have some idea, but right now battlefield commanders are evaluating the situation and standing by. But there is a lot of focus on that area on the Iraqi side of the border. It goes about 10 kilometers into Iraq. There are berms, obstacles, and minefields that have to be dealt with. The efforts to clear that are ongoing. One more thing about that artillery barrage. It only lasted for about maybe 6 minutes or so. Again, this is probably not the shock and awe campaign, but believe me, it was a spectacular sight to see.
Greg, are you getting any sense from the people you talk to that the shock and awe part of the campaign is something that will happen tonight, or are they just sort of, you know, scaring the Iraqi leadership into thinking that maybe now's a good time just to put down your guns and quit?
Well, I know that they have a game plan, and it's a game plan that they're keeping pretty close to the vest. We know some details about it. We can't really say when things are going to happen, but the major thrust of this effort does not seem to have started yet. It's really that prepping of the battlefield, shaping of the battlefield, as the military refers to it. They want to confront the Iraqis on their own terms, and if they fire these volleys of artillery shells, if they should cross that border, whenever that happens, they will be in a state, the Iraqis, the posture, if you will, conducive to defeat. That's a phrase that one of the battalion commanders has thrown around quite a bit. So just a fascinating place to be. I got to tell you, the embedding has worked out so far extremely well. The military brought us to the appropriate place at the appropriate time to see the launch of the first major ground offensive since hostilities have started.
All right, Greg Kelly, thank you very much. Be safe there. We do want to alert you to something going on in Kuwait right now. Air raid sirens have sounded again. I believe this is the 7th time that they have sounded since all of this began, almost 18 hours ago, if we could take a look at that. Right now, you're looking at a shot of Baghdad. But in the meantime, in the middle of all that going on in Kuwait City, I want to go to William Lajeunesse. William, what can you tell us? What is this about now?
Well, Neil, as you did, we do have a missile siren going off. This is the 5th time today. Previously, we do know that U.S. forces have shot down 2 incoming missiles, as well as the Kuwaiti military shooting down an incoming missile. The siren you just heard indicates that we should put on these gas masks, take protective measures. Many people around here are going into concrete bunkers and shelters in and around the city, as well as journalists in the hotels here. This indicates that the radar has picked up an incoming missile. Now, in the past, it has shown to be entirely accurate. There's also another missile came in today that hit just about a football field away from Camp Commando and thousands of U.S. forces. Now, those Scud Busters, as they're called, the U.S. Patriots, have been very effective. In fact, on one missile, the Kuwait military says they fired 3 to bring down the missile. Now, Iraq is not supposed to have the Scud. The Scud has a range of about 400 miles. Under the UN resolutions, they can only have rockets that go 95 miles. The second missile that was hit was this Al Samud missile, which was a range of about 95 to 150. Now, we thought anyways, as U.S. forces move forward, we would be under less of a threat from missile fire, because it would basically cover the area from which those missiles would be fired. Some of the other missiles have a range of about 56 miles. This does indicate, however, that Iraq is still targeting, number one, U.S. forces, some still here, or overshot that, or they may be, again, trying to hit civilian targets here in Kuwait as punishment for quartering U.S. troops. Neil?
Interesting, William, because Kuwait seems to be...
We are now waiting.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
All right. Well, it's interesting.
I was just going to say, right, at this point in time, we are waiting for an all-clear signal. Generally speaking, that will take 20 to 30 minutes. Well, that's not an all-clear signal. That remains that the warning is still in place here. And people, as I look down on the street, I see absolutely no one, and see only 1 or 2 cars. Well, that is the all-clear signal. That's the all-clear signal, Neil.
All right, I'm very happy to hear that. William, it's interesting. Well, that was a scary call for you, my friend. I'm curious, it's all the activity we've seen from Iraq at this point has been directed at Kuwait, not at Israel. It hasn't been directed at other neighbors. It's been really focused on Kuwait. And that seems to be what offense you could call it, the totality of that offense. What do you make of that?
Well, two things. Number one, there was a great fear early on that Kuwait citizens, the state of Kuwait, would become a target for basically housing U.S. troops. That was a real fear. Also, the Scuds and the Ababil 100s, the Al Samouds, are not all that accurate. So while the Iraqis may have been trying to hit U.S. troops, which albeit are not far from here, 230,000 troops in the northern part of the country, they could miss the troops and hit us. Now, the warheads that were fired here, the 3 that were intercepted and the one that landed in the desert harmlessly, had conventional warheads, no chemical warheads incoming. The fear was, of course, they had weaponized VX or anthrax and loaded onto one of these missile warheads. So at this point in time, we don't know if this missile that, in all likelihood, landed or was intercepted somewhere in Kuwait, whether or not that was aimed at U.S. troops or aimed at us.
William Lajeunesse, please be safe, my friend. Thank you very, very much. We want to bring you up to date on another item that's come into our newsroom right now. Reuters is reporting that poison ricin has apparently been found in a Paris rail station. We don't know anything more than that, but that the poison was found at a Paris rail station. We're not even sure the amount of it or whether this might have been terrorist-driven. But again, some of this material has been found in a Paris rail station. Again, a bit of irony there if they've proven to be something terrorist-inspired. Of course, France, one of the countries that had opted not to be part of this coalition that would take on Iraq. All right, in the meantime, I want to bring you now to Chris Klein in Erbil, Iraq, with the latest from there. Chris.
Neil, a significant development today on the diplomatic and military front in terms of a new alliance being forged with U.S.-led coalition forces and Kurdish forces. An agreement apparently has been struck whereby some 30 to perhaps eventually 90 to even 100,000 Kurdish fighters will work in conjunction with the allied forces that are expected here over the course of the next few days. Now, the reason for this is that given that the U.S.-Turkish troop deal remained at an impasse, and given that the U.S.-led forces that will strike from the north are primarily air-mobile, air assault troops and therefore relatively lightly equipped troops, they cannot do without further support as they will make their way towards Mosul and Kirkuk. Therefore, these 30 to perhaps 90, 100,000 Kurdish fighters, although themselves they are lightly armed, essentially light infantry, will stiffen the American line, if you will.
Chris, the activity that you're noticing there, we were talking to William before about how the Iraqis are targeting, at least at this point, Kuwait and citizens of Kuwait. Obviously, are soldiers stationed in Kuwait, but very little else and throughout the country. Can you update us where that stands?
Certainly. It's been a strange sort of bit of armed theater here in northern Iraq, where a lot of the enemy Iraqi garrisons that face their Kurdish opponents are separated sometimes by very short distances, but no fire has truly been exchanged. The great possibility exists that many of these Iraqi units are looking forward to surrender, but many of them are fearful of surrendering to the Kurds, given the way that the Kurds have been handled by the Baghdad regime, and they await the arrival of allied forces. Now, secondly, given what we've just witnessed taking place in the previous report, I must emphasize that there is a profound fear here of a possible biological or chemical attack by Iraq. I mean, of course, this is a region that knows the horror of gas warfare, and perhaps the potential enormous tragedy in the making here is there are virtually no local defenses against nuclear, bacteriological, or chemical warfare. There are no NBC suits here. Gas masks are incredibly scarce. Those that do exist are antiquated. The filters are well past their sell-by date. the majority of the civilians and the Kurdish military forces here simply cannot protect themselves from gas attacks. So what we just heard now, an all is well civil defense siren going off in Kuwait. Here, the great fear is if those sirens go off and if those sirens indicate a biological or chemical attack, it will be seen as doomsday here. Neil.
Are you getting the sense that as far as our forces and what we can do in northern Iraq, where we can have access to Turkish airspace, but certainly not bases there, that limits or stymies the coalition effort to make a better go of it in northern Iraq?
I wouldn't say it stymies it. I think our commanders are doing a lot of creative lateral thinking. A unit that we can deploy, very effective, premier, elite unit in the U.S. arsenal is the 101st Airborne Air Assault Division, essentially air cavalry deploying from helicopters. Now, this is a unit that, while lacking heavy armor, packs a considerable punch with the anti-tank weaponry that the infantrymen carry, as well as the air attack helicopter assets that it possesses. And certainly they will be able to deploy via Turkish airspace. And if they are able to link up effectively with the Kurdish forces here on the ground that for some months now rather discreetly have been working with U.S. intelligence operatives as well as other U.S. And perhaps other allied special operations troops and advisors, this will become a potent force, if a rather unconventional one. Now, we cannot confirm at this stage whether the airstrikes that some of the Arab networks have been reporting are actually taking place in the city of Mosul. What we could say is that Allied air bombardment in Mosul is inevitable as a step to eliminate Iraqi air defenses there, to strike also at the suspected Iraqi Republican Guard armored units that are there, which then would eliminate some of that armored threat to our lighter air assault troops, and equally, if we are able to strike their air defenses, would allow our air assets to provide close air support and sort of make up for that lack of armor that a joint U.S. Kurdish force would have in striking Mosul and Kirkuk. Neil.
All right, Chris Klein, thank you very much. Be safe, my friend. Want to update you on a couple of quick items. Now, we told you a little earlier that the U.S. and its British colleagues have indeed taken an Iraqi border town. That was Qasr. You heard some chatting about that a while ago. But it is, again, establishing a beachhead in the border towns, at least, right between Iraq and Kuwait. Other towns and cities are expected to fall in rapid order, or that is the hope, at least. You're also hearing a lot of talk back and forth as to when the next wave, obviously the more dramatic wave of attacks that is expected, the so-called shock and awe part of this campaign, when that might ensue. Now, keep in mind, we're a little over past midnight right now in Iraq. The activities we saw last night occurred almost at dawn in Iraq. So obviously, under the cover of darkness, there's still a great deal of time for that cover. That's something I do want to raise with my friend here, Colonel David Hunt, to get his sense of timing. That's going to be important, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's an amazing effort so far. Success. It is showing from a civilian standpoint the trust that this president has, this administration has in the military, and to give an order like he did last night to do this decapitation. Flexibility to attack in Afghanistan. At the same time, we're doing cruise missiles, 40 cruise missiles back. And this seems to be a couple of possibilities going on here. One, we still have to get an assessment of what happened with the decapitation and to see if it's having an effect on the Republican Guard or other units. And so you're seeing, I think, a very flexible military that's not just going ahead lockstep with the plan of shock and awe, which could also be a deception on everyone's part, or we are waiting to soften it up and we're going to go full bore.
Well, maybe, is there another strategy psychologically, and this is something you know a lot more about than I do, to make the enemy think, do you really want this shock and awe?
Yeah, that's absolutely. They're trying to gauge the effect of what we've had so far. I mean, imagine having a meeting in the afternoon, getting up for coffee, and have 40 missiles come in the back window, and so that's reverberating. And we may have killed who we wanted to. We still don't know. But it seems that we are judging the effects of the last 12 hours and trying to give the Iraqis the chance you just mentioned, or we're just screwing with them.
Yeah, it's interesting, too. I'd want to update as well, Colonel, if you'll indulge me here. Treasury Secretary John Snow is on the wires right now saying that the U.S. plans to confiscate all non-diplomatic Iraqi government assets in the U.S. Now, as you know, this is a very difficult kind of a fuzzy figure to sort of ascertain. When we looked in this in the business unit here at Fox, we had come to the conclusion it could be anywhere from $1.5 billion to $5.5 billion here. Some have put that figure considerably higher at north of $10 billion. There's just no way of knowing. But obviously the administration here looking at the money side of this to try to squeeze Iraq not only within its country, but all the way over here. This was essentially, if I remember, Colonel, the kind of approach we took to dealing with the Taliban and al-Qaeda to try to freeze their assets and sort of go for a double whammy.
I'm trying to think of what you do with it after you get it.
Yeah, what do you do? You can't take it on the open market, right?
Right. I mean, I gotta have a yard sale on some Iraqi furniture. I'm not sure if they, but it's pressure. The psychological pressure we've been building for months. There's the military pressure of all these plans, these psychological operations we've been floating. And then we attacked in daytime. We attacked from submarines, boats, and F-17s and stealth fighters. And now we got Marines moving out, the American Army moving out, helicopters. You're sitting on the back, if you're sitting on the Iraqi side, there's a lot of toilets filling up right now because there's some nervous guys.
Do you think that those same guys are fearing that they've got to worry on both sides? If they surrender, Saddam's going to kill them. That's what they fear, right? So they've got to look for the right opportunity.
There's one unit, yes, but there's one unit, it's Republican Guards, that have these guys standing. That's a hell of a way to run any organization, but you have to have somebody with a gun to your head before you do it. And you got the guys literally on these shoes that are in the borders that seem to be giving up. But what we're doing is assessing. It's on our timetable, and we're trying to give them an out. We're still at this time. We could flatten this country. And still, we're trying to be humane while we're conducting a war. It's a huge tribute to both the American way of life, American way of fighting, and the discipline of this force. It's amazing.
All right, Colonel, if you could stick there, a couple of things we want to update you. Remember we told you about the chemical ricin that was found in a French rail station. We're beginning to get a little more details. This was actually discovered a few days ago, actually 3 days ago, 2 small flasks of this unidentified liquid that has now since been traced to be ricin. We do not know anything more than that or what the intentions were. I did mention a bit of irony in this. Of course, this occurred in France, one of the countries that was not a fan of going into Iraq and being a party to any sort of action against Iraq or deemed to be anti-Muslim or whatever you have it. And here we have now the French having to deal with a potential terrorist issue of their own. All right, David Lee Miller now from Doha, Qatar, on what's going on there. David Lee, what can you tell us?
Hi there, Neil. Well, to some extent, I am in shock and awe that now as the conflict continues to escalate, we see the Allied forces pushing deeper into Iraq. We see Scuds fired in the direction of Kuwait. We see the air campaign continuing over Baghdad. This right now is the media center here at Central Command. I'm going to ask the cameraman here to take a tighter shot of the podium behind me, and you get a good sense of what's going on here right now. It's about 12:30 in the morning as the campaign continues to escalate, and some of my colleagues are actually sleeping here in some of the seats. There are 600+ reporters here in town closely covering the events of the Central Command. This is a $1 million+ media center, but at this hour there is really, if you will, shrieks of silence coming out of here. The decision has been made by the military at this time that their #1 priority is to look after the troops in the field and not to disseminate information from this media center at this time. This is going to be a location, Neil, that we're soon going to see regularly on television, but as of right now, this room at this hour is all but empty. Now, as for the man who is leading the conflict, leading the charge, U.S. General Tommy Franks, he, we are told at this hour, is closely monitoring events. He has the capability to do that, they say, from virtually anywhere that he is located, whether it is here in Central Command or whether he is traveling. He has the capability to sort of have an immediate headquarters, if you will, and the authorities here say that they are not going to reveal his specific location, but that wherever he is very much in charge. He is also a man who is getting by, we should say, we understand, on very, very little sleep. He is keeping a low media profile, but again, I underscore, Neil, he is very, very focused on the war effort. Jim Wilkinson, the Director of Strategic Communications, told me earlier, and I quote him now, General Franks says the most important focus is making sure troops in the field have all that they need to win. And when the time is right, there will be briefings in this room, but the time is not yet ripe. What we can tell you, though, Neil, and some of the limited information that has been released from here, 9 attack aircraft and 2 refueling planes in the last 24 hours took off from the Al Udeid Air Force Base here, but no specific details about their mission were released. We do know that the timing coincides, with you will, with the airstrikes that took place in the last 24 hours targeting some of the Iraqi leadership. Again, we asked for details, who was targeted, what was the outcome of those airstrikes. And again, we were told we're going to have to wait for more information. But when it becomes available, much of it will be released from this room, the media center here at the Central Command Center in Doha. And Neil, we have it staffed 24 hours a day. As soon as there's news, we'll let you know. That's the latest from Doha.
Thank you, sir, very much. David Lee Miller. We are getting some more information now on this Treasury Secretary John Snow directive to try to keep on top of all of these assets that I think my friend Colonel Hunt correctly pointed out are going to be kind of hard to redeem anyway. But having said that, Treasury Secretary Snow is saying that all non-diplomatic Iraqi government assets in the United States will be frozen. The order authorizes the Treasury to marshal the assets and then to use the funds for the benefit and the welfare of the Iraqi people. Unfortunately, there's really no way to quantify that, but the feeling seems to be you want to prevent the government there now from looting essentially all goods and assets in the country, even outside the country, or fear that some of them might even try to escape from the country, and again, to try to get those goods back to the Iraqi people who are the rightful owners of them. Of course, this is very difficult to do, and we can't even quantify how much we're talking about. I've told you about how we've tried to ascertain this at Fox. We've come up with $1.5 billion. Some people say $5 billion, maybe others $20 billion. There's just no way to quantify it, but the administration is making it clear, much as it did in going after al-Qaeda funding right after the September 11th attacks in this country, that you want to choke off that supply, deal with them militarily, and also deal with them financially. To that end, let's go back to Capitol Hill, where we'll find Republican Senator Trent Lott of Mississippi. By the way, he's a key player on the Intelligence Committee. Senator, good to have you. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Neil. Glad to be with you again.
Let me ask you, if you don't mind, I don't want to hit you broadside, sir, on these assets that might or might not be here and just what we're talking about. Is it substantial?
I think it is substantial. I can't give you any real number either, and we haven't gotten a briefing in detail on that in intelligence, but there clearly are some assets here, and I know the Secretary of Treasury is going to be keeping an eye on them.
Senator, let me ask you as well. Tom Ridge had been indicating that it's not a matter of if al-Qaeda or some terrorist group tries to respond to our Iraq initiatives, but when, and whether they'll be successful isn't so much the issue as that they will try. On the Intelligence Committee, are you getting that same info?
There's no question that we have information that there are at least al-Qaeda sympathizers in the country. There are a number of people that have been under supervision. Some of them have already been picked up. But there are people here in the country that would like to do some damage. Now, are they getting some command, or were they trained sufficiently on their own that they might could do something? I do know, though, that all of our law enforcement people, the FBI, everybody has ratcheted it up to the maximum level. We're doing more here in the United States Capitol. I think we're as secure as we can possibly be. You just have to be more alert, and you have to assume there's going to be some attempts and be prepared to intercept it and stop it. I feel pretty good right now that we're doing everything we can, and we should be okay.
Is it understood, though, Senator, that because we have made this Iraq incursion, that they're out to get us?
There's no question that there is a heightened threat, and that some people are allowed to be influenced by this and may try to do something crazy. You know, it doesn't take but one person that doesn't care anything about his own life or the life of innocent people to cause some real havoc. One of the reasons why we're going into Iraq, we should never forget this, is if terrorists could get their hands on what Saddam Hussein has, and we know he has it, nerve gas, anthrax, a number of other chemical or biological weapons, it wouldn't take but just a small amount to really be dangerous to hundreds, thousands of people. And that's why we're going in there and dealing with this problem now before it becomes a greater one here at home.
Speaking of Saddam, are you convinced, as the White House is, Senator, that the video we saw of Saddam speaking with the glasses on and all of that, that was in fact Saddam this morning?
I don't know about that, Neil. We were supposed to have an Intelligence Committee briefing at 3 o'clock, and I expected to get some information like that during the briefing. It was canceled because obviously everybody's very busy right now. The briefing we had yesterday was a very good one, gave us a lot of information that gave me room for encouragement. But I thought that strike last night was intended to decapitate or take out some of the key leadership, hopefully even Saddam Hussein. It was worth the effort, and I don't know that we know yet for sure how successful it was or was not, but it was the right thing to do. It was also a good indication of technologically what our people can do. Those cruise missiles were actually, the instructions were changed on the fly for a very precision strike. So I feel like we hit the right target, but we don't know for sure what we actually got with it.
Yeah, I know you can't divulge secrets, Senator, so I'll be asking this question gingerly, but my own sort of James Bond view of this is that someone leaked the word, look, Saddam is over here. He's in this bunker. And you know, I know we were trying to intercept and get wireless messages to people using advanced, really sometimes not even that advanced technologies, simple cell phone calls to say, tell us where he is. Now, that means then that there is someone potentially leaking information to us among his guard or others. Is that safe to say that that's how we might be getting some of this information on his whereabouts?
Well, just common sense would lead you to believe that we probably had some information that there might be some key people at a particular place. I mean, that was in the news this morning, so I haven't revealed anything. Also, common sense would tell you that, you know, surely our government has tried to identify people in Baghdad that could get us information or that we could communicate with, and you just have to assume that's happening, and hopefully some of it will be helpful as we go forward.
All right, Senator Trent Lott, always a pleasure, sir. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Neil.
Senator Trent Lott. All right, now let's go to the White House to get a read on things with Wendell Goler. Wendell, I do want to ask you a question on the White House now convinced that Saddam was rattled. They emphasized that at a couple of different points today. I think you did in one of your prior reports. How sure are they that he was, in fact, and maybe is, in fact, rattled?
Well, there are indications from his address, his videotaped address, if you take that to be one that was performed last night. As you and Senator Lott were discussing, officials here privately think that Saddam probably did survive that first attempt to end his leadership of the Iraqi people last night. They say him paging through the steno pad he had was not like the addresses he had made in the past. Publicly, officials here say they're still studying the videotape. They say Saddam is known to use body doubles, but privately officials say that is more for long-distance fooling of people, like in motorcades traveling through Baghdad, not a situation where a body double of Saddam would actually deliver an address. One official said privately, it's not like the movie Dave, where you get somebody who can mimic the facial gestures, the voice, and everything of the president, and actually deliver a presidential address. Still, they saw Saddam's frequent looking down at his notes as a sign that he was rattled. They say he clearly knows now or suspects that there's somebody in his inner circle that he can't trust, and he's wondering about where he's going to sleep tonight. Reporters got a glimpse of the president today. A few words from him also after a cabinet meeting. Aides had switched plans for the day's photo op to be an Oval Office session of the president meeting with the president of Cameroon. That would have sparked some questions about why the Cameroon wouldn't publicly support the U.S.-British resolution in the UN Security Council. And also by showing the president with his cabinet, they want to show he is not neglecting the domestic agenda as he tries to eliminate Saddam Hussein's regime.
We discussed the need to make sure we have plans in place to encourage economic vitality and growth. We will continue to push for a Medicare system that is compassionate for our seniors. We care deeply about the fact that some children in our society can't read. We want the best of education for every citizen in America.
Also sending signals about showing the president displaying the proper blend of leadership and reliance of expertise from his military advisors. This picture of the president from early this morning, meeting with CIA Director George Tenet, Vice President Cheney, and White House Chief of Staff Andy Carr. It was Tenet's intelligence, of course, that led to last night's strike at what officials thought was the overnight location of Saddam and his sons. And privately, Neil, a matter that you mentioned just a short while ago, Treasury Secretary John Snow announcing the U.S. is acting to freeze all the non-diplomatic assets Iraq has in this country. We, like you, have tried to put a figure on that, whether it's in the billions or many billions. We cannot determine what that number might be. Of course, trade with Iraq ended with the Gulf War, but Snow acting to make sure that whatever non-diplomatic money is here is saved for the use of the Iraqi people. Neil?
Wendell, he also took time to talk about the economy today. I noticed that, well, the eyes of the world were on him. He didn't waste a nanosecond to remind people that his eyes were as well on how the economy's faring, maybe taking a cue from his dad.
Well, you're right. There was the widespread perception that a recession in this country lingered on because the president was more focused on the Persian Gulf War, a recession that was deeper in some parts of the country than others and cost the president a tremendous political support. 90% public approval rating disappeared in enough time for Mr. Bush to lose the election. This President Bush came into office vowing privately not to make that mistake, not to squander his political capital, and not to let people think that he was neglecting domestic matters at the expense of foreign affairs. So you had Ari Fleischer today talking about the president pursuing an active and aggressive domestic agenda, pushing for the $600+ billion or $700 billion economic stimulus package he now has on Capitol Hill. Neil?
All right, Wendell Gold at the White House. Thank you very, very much. You know, there was a trading day going on here, and I know normally you're used to seeing the business program during this hour, so we have been keeping up those market averages around the globe for you in the lower right portion of your screen. What's curious about what happened in the U.S. of A. today is the markets were up. In fact, with all this tension, they have continued to be up 7 straight days running now. What's going on here? The market sense something we do not. Fox's senior business correspondents Brenda Butner at Charles Schwab offices and Terry Keenan at the NASDAQ market site as we run through those boards. Brenda, to you first. Oil is what I want to focus on for a second, if you don't mind. When we got word of possible oil fields under fire and literally on fire in southern Iraq today, we had a quick jump up in energy prices. And then a quick rundown. What happened?
Yes, it was just a brief spike, and that's what's really amazing. In fact, oil remains at a 3-month low, as does gold. I mean, what is amazing about this whole day is the fact that it was just like another day at the office. Stocks, you know, the Dow up for a 7-day winning streak. It's as if there were no war going on. It was an ordinary day at the office. In fact, you know, you've seen worse days if you had a bad jobs report. So
absolutely.
So I think, you know, traders had one eye fixed on the TV screen, one eye fixed on their trading screens, and they really were voting as if this were going to be a very swift, successful war. But there is one question. We're really seeing traders vote. We're seeing professionals vote. What's going to happen when the real regular Joes get in there? I mean, they've been burned many times by a bear market. They've got a lot of money on the sidelines. What happens when they put their money in? And I think that's the real question as to whether this rally is sustainable.
All right, and we will be talking to Molly Devereux-Mel a little bit later about the oil situation. But I do, Terry, want to tip this to you now. This notion that the street does seem to think this is going to be quick and easy. Up to now, well, the information at least we've been getting from our forces there is that things are going as planned, if not ahead of plans. That's what investors want to see, right?
Exactly, and Neil, it's very important that is what happens, not only for the country, of course, and our troops, but for investors, because unlike 1991, the market has anticipated a swift and successful war, and the Dow has rallied some 800 points in the last 7 sessions, the exact opposite of what happened in 1991, because on the first day of the war in 1991, the Dow had its second biggest point gain ever, equivalent to a 400-point pop today, and of course, today we just kind of got the yawn, but we had the huge rally in anticipation of all of this.
Do you think, though, Terry, that part of what's going on with the markets is this belief, this firm belief, that it's life after we take over Iraq that's going to be good. They seem to think that's the case.
They do, and everything that the president has said has helped to assure investors that that's probably what will happen. One other difference, Neil, and of course we've seen this being played out all day, this is an internet war, it's a cell phone war, and that's a huge difference from 1991.
Terry Keenan and Brenda Butner, thank you very much. We have this item just into our newsroom, want to pass it along. The Associated Press is reporting now that U.S. Marines have indeed now crossed into Iraq. Brett Baer is at the Pentagon. Maybe he can update us on that. Brett, what do you know?
Hi, Neil. We can tell you that U.S. troops are on the move. We're not going to get into specifics of